Tonight we're diving deep into the hidden world of ancient Egyptian sleep remedies. From sacred lotus flowers that promised divine dreams to opium-laced potions that carried pharaohs into eternal rest. We'll uncover how these desert dwellers mastered the art of sleep thousands of years before modern medicine, and why their secrets are making a shocking comeback in today's world. Prepare to discover how a civilization built on the banks of the Nile created the foundation for every sleep aid we know today. Before we go back in time together, if you're enjoying settling in for the night with a bit of Egyptian history, consider hitting subscribe. And I'm curious, where in the world are you listening from right now? And what time is it there? Drop it in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Have you ever wondered what kept ancient pharaohs awake at night? The answer might surprise you. It wasn't just the weight of ruling an empire that made sleep elusive in ancient Egypt. The desert heat, the constant threat of invasion, and the spiritual responsibility of connecting with the gods created a perfect storm of insomnia that plagued even the most powerful rulers. Picture this scene. It's 1550 BCE, and Pharaoh Thutmose III tosses and turns on his golden bed. The linen sheets stick to his skin despite the cool night breeze flowing through his palace windows. His mind races with thoughts of military campaigns, trade negotiations, and religious ceremonies. But unlike modern insomniacs who might reach for a bottle of melatonin, this pharaoh had access to something far more exotic and powerful. The royal physicians, known as the SWW, would be summoned to the bedchamber. These weren't just any doctors. They were master chemists who understood the secrets of plants that could transport the human mind from the waking world into the realm of dreams. Their knowledge came from centuries of experimentation, passed down through secret papyrus scrolls that contained formulas more complex than anything we see in modern pharmacies. But what exactly did these ancient sleep masters know that we've forgotten? The answer lies in their understanding of plants that grew along the fertile banks of the Nile River. These weren't ordinary herbs. They were botanical keys that could unlock different states of consciousness, from gentle drowsiness to deep, dream-filled sleep. The Egyptians discovered that sleep wasn't just about rest. It was a sacred journey that connected the living world with the afterlife. They believed that during sleep, the soul would temporarily leave the body and travel through the Duat, the underworld where gods and spirits dwelt. This made sleep aids not just medical tools, but religious instruments that facilitated communication with divine beings. What's fascinating is how they categorized different types of sleep. There was natural sleep, which they called the small death. Then there was induced sleep, achieved through their botanical concoctions, which they considered a form of controlled spiritual journey. The most sacred was the eternal sleep of death, which their mummification process was designed to make as peaceful as possible. The royal sleep chambers were designed with this spiritual aspect in mind. They weren't just bedrooms, they were temples dedicated to the sleep gods. The walls were painted with images of Nut, the sky goddess who swallowed the sun each night, and Khnum, the ram-headed god who was believed to create dreams on his potter's wheel. Incense burners filled with specially prepared herbs would smoke throughout the night, creating an atmosphere that encouraged both physical relaxation and spiritual transcendence. But here's where it gets really interesting. The Egyptians understood something about sleep that modern science is only now rediscovering. They knew that different plants affected different stages of sleep. Some herbs would help with falling asleep, others would deepen sleep, and still others would influence the content and vividness of dreams. This wasn't random experimentation. It was sophisticated pharmaceutical knowledge that took centuries to develop. The process of preparing these sleep aids was as important as the ingredients themselves. The timing of when plants were harvested, the phases of the moon, the temperature of the preparation, even the direction the preparer faced while mixing the ingredients, all of these factors were believed to influence the potency and effectiveness of the final product. Royal sleep ceremonies could last for hours. The pharaoh would be bathed in water infused with lotus petals, massaged with oils containing sedative herbs, and fed special foods designed to promote drowsiness. The entire process was orchestrated like a religious ritual, because that's exactly what it was. Sleep was considered a form of temporary death and rebirth, a daily rehearsal for the final journey into the afterlife. The results, according to ancient accounts, were remarkable. Pharaohs reported not just restful sleep, but prophetic dreams that guided their decision-making. They claimed to receive visits from deceased ancestors who offered wisdom about ruling the kingdom. Whether these experiences were real divine communications or simply the effects of psychoactive plants, they shaped the course of Egyptian history for over 3,000 years. This sophisticated understanding of sleep and consciousness didn't develop overnight. It was the result of thousands of years of careful observation and experimentation. The Egyptians were master botanists who catalogued the effects of hundreds of different plants on the human nervous system. Their sleep laboratories were the temples and palaces where priest-physicians conducted experiments that would be considered groundbreaking even by today's standards. What's most remarkable is how this knowledge was preserved and transmitted. The techniques for preparing these ancient sleep aids were considered so valuable that they were written in hieroglyphs on papyrus scrolls that were buried with pharaohs, hidden in temple walls, and passed down through secret societies of physicians. Some of these formulas were so closely guarded that they were known only to a few individuals in each generation. The legacy of Egyptian sleep medicine extended far beyond Egypt's borders. Greek and Roman physicians studied Egyptian methods and adapted them for their own use. Islamic scholars during the medieval period preserved many Egyptian texts that would otherwise have been lost. And surprisingly, many of the plants and techniques used by ancient Egyptian sleep masters are making a comeback in modern alternative medicine. But to truly understand the genius of Egyptian sleep aids, we need to examine the specific plants they used and how they discovered their properties. The story begins with a flower so beautiful and mysterious that it became the symbol of rebirth itself. Chapter 2. The sacred blue lotus awakens ancient Egypt. What if I told you that one of the most sacred symbols in ancient Egypt was actually a powerful sleep aid disguised as a beautiful flower? The blue lotus, known scientifically as Nymphaea caerulea, was far more than just decorative art on tomb walls and papyrus scrolls. This stunning aquatic plant held the key to unlocking altered states of consciousness that the Egyptians believed connected them directly to their gods. Picture the scene along the Nile River at dawn. As the first rays of sunlight pierce through the morning mist, thousands of blue lotus flowers begin to open across the water's surface. Their petals, a brilliant blue with hints of purple and white, unfurl in perfect symmetry, as if welcoming the return of Ra, the sun god. But these flowers weren't just opening to greet the day. They were releasing chemical compounds that would soon find their way into the most important religious and medical practices of ancient Egypt. The Egyptians didn't stumble upon the blue lotus by accident. Archaeological evidence suggests they were cultivating these flowers as early as 3000 BCE, making them one of the first civilizations to deliberately grow psychoactive plants for spiritual and medicinal purposes. But how did they figure out that this particular water lily could induce states of euphoria and deep, dream-filled sleep? The discovery likely came from careful observation of animals. Egyptian priests noticed that birds and small mammals that fed on blue lotus flowers exhibited unusual behavior. They became drowsy, appeared to experience vivid hallucinations, and entered deep sleep states that lasted much longer than normal. Intrigued by these observations, the priest-physicians began experimenting with the flowers on themselves. What they discovered was revolutionary. The blue lotus contains two powerful alkaloids called nuciferine and aporphine. Nuciferine acts as a natural sedative that promotes relaxation and reduces anxiety. Aporphine, on the other hand, is a dopamine receptor agonist that can produce mild euphoria and vivid, lucid dreams. Together, these compounds created an ideal combination for both medical treatment and spiritual exploration. But here's where the Egyptian approach became truly sophisticated. They didn't just eat the flowers raw or brew them into simple teas. Instead, they developed complex preparation methods that maximized the psychoactive effects while minimizing any negative side effects. The most popular method involved steeping the flowers in wine for several days, allowing the alcohol to extract the alkaloids more effectively than water alone could manage. The process was almost alchemical in its precision. Fresh lotus flowers would be picked at specific times during their blooming cycle, usually just before dawn when their alkaloid content was at its peak. The flowers would then be dried in the shade to preserve their potency, ground into fine powders, or prepared as concentrated extracts, using techniques that modern chemists are still trying to fully understand. Royal preparations were even more elaborate. The flowers might be combined with honey, which acted as a preservative and enhanced absorption, or mixed with various oils that helped carry the active compounds across the skin when used as massage treatments. Some formulas included additional herbs that would enhance or modify the effects, creating customized experiences for different purposes. The religious significance of the blue lotus cannot be overstated. It appeared in countless works of Egyptian art, from tomb paintings to jewelry to architectural decorations. But these weren't just aesthetic choices. Every image of a blue lotus was a coded reference to the plant's role in Egyptian spirituality. The flower represented the daily cycle of death and rebirth, mirroring how consciousness fades during sleep and returns upon waking. In Egyptian mythology, the blue lotus was associated with the creation story itself. According to legend, the first blue lotus emerged from the primordial waters of chaos, and from its center rose the sun god Ra, bringing light and order to the universe. This made the flower not just a sleep aid, but a symbol of cosmic renewal and divine consciousness. The most sacred use of blue lotus occurred during religious festivals, particularly the festival of drunkenness dedicated to the goddess Hathor. During these celebrations, participants would consume wine infused with blue lotus flowers, entering trance-like states that were believed to allow direct communication with the divine. These weren't wild parties, but carefully orchestrated spiritual experiences designed to strengthen the connection between the human and divine realms. Temple priests developed specialized techniques for using blue lotus in their spiritual practices. They would burn the dried flowers as incense, creating aromatic smoke that induced mild, altered states in everyone present. They prepared lotus-infused oils for anointing ceremonies and created complex mixtures that were applied to the skin during mummification processes, believing that the plant's properties would ease the soul's transition to the afterlife. The medical applications were equally impressive. Egyptian physicians prescribed blue lotus preparations for a wide range of sleep disorders, from simple insomnia to nightmares and sleep terrors. They understood that different concentrations produced different effects, and they carefully adjusted dosages based on the patient's age, weight, and specific symptoms. What's particularly fascinating is how they recognized that blue lotus affected different people in different ways. Ancient medical papyri describe detailed patient observations, noting how some individuals experienced primarily sedative effects, while others had more pronounced psychoactive experiences. This level of personalized medicine was remarkably advanced for its time. The preparation of blue lotus medicines was considered both an art and a science. Physician priests underwent years of training to learn the proper techniques, and the knowledge was passed down through carefully guarded apprenticeships. The most skilled practitioners could create formulations that produced specific types of dreams, enhanced creativity, or provided relief from particular types of mental distress. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Egyptian blue lotus use was their understanding of what modern scientists call set and setting. They knew that the environment in which the plant was consumed, the mental state of the user, and the cultural context all played crucial roles in determining the experience. This led to the development of elaborate rituals and ceremonies designed to create optimal conditions for beneficial effects. The decline of blue lotus use in Egypt began during the Roman occupation, when foreign authorities became suspicious of any practices that might unite Egyptians in spiritual experiences they couldn't control. Many of the traditional preparation methods were lost, and the plant itself became increasingly rare as its natural habitat along the Nile was altered by agricultural development. Today, the true Egyptian blue lotus, Nymphaea caerulea, is extremely rare in its native habitat. The construction of the Aswan Dam dramatically changed the Nile's ecosystem, and much of the knowledge about traditional preparation methods has been lost. However, modern researchers are beginning to rediscover the sophisticated pharmacology that made this plant so important to ancient Egyptian civilization. But the blue lotus wasn't the only plant in the Egyptian sleep medicine cabinet. In fact, it was just the beginning of a botanical arsenal that included some of the most powerful and dangerous plants known to humanity. Chapter 3. Opium's Ancient Egyptian Empire. Did you know that ancient Egypt might have been the world's first pharmaceutical empire, built on the back of a single, seemingly innocent flower? The opium poppy, Papaver somniferum, arrived in Egypt around 1500 BCE and quickly revolutionized everything from medicine to religion to international trade. But this wasn't just about getting high or managing pain. The Egyptians turned opium into a sophisticated tool for exploring consciousness, treating illness, and even preparing for death. The story of how opium came to Egypt reads like an ancient thriller. Around 1500 BCE, Egyptian traders returning from expeditions to the eastern Mediterranean brought back small clay vessels containing a mysterious brown resin that the locals called the joy plant. These weren't ordinary merchants. They were part of Pharaoh Thutmose III's expanded trade networks that stretched from Nubia in the south to Syria in the north. What they brought back would change Egyptian civilization forever. But how did the Egyptians figure out what this strange substance could do? The answer lies in their systematic approach to testing new medicines. Egyptian physician priests had developed what we would recognize today as clinical trial procedures. When a new substance arrived in Egypt, it would be tested first on animals, then on volunteers from the priestly class, and finally on patients with specific medical conditions. The results were carefully recorded in hieroglyphic medical texts that read like modern pharmaceutical studies. The first recorded use of opium in Egypt appears in the famous Ebers Papyrus, a medical document that's over 3,500 years old and contains more than 800 medical prescriptions. But here's what makes the Egyptian approach so remarkable. They didn't just use opium as a general painkiller. Instead, they developed dozens of different preparations for specific conditions, each with its own precise recipe and application method. For sleep disorders, Egyptian physicians created what they called dream enhancers. These were opium preparations combined with other herbs that not only induced deep sleep, but also influenced the content and vividness of dreams. The most popular formula combined opium with blue lotus flowers and mandrake root, creating a powerful synergy that produced what users described as prophetic visions and communications with deceased ancestors. The preparation process was incredibly sophisticated. Fresh opium would be harvested from poppy pods at specific times during their development cycle, usually just before dawn when the alkaloid content was at its peak. The raw opium would then undergo a complex purification process involving multiple filtering stages, temperature-controlled heating, and the addition of various other plant extracts that enhanced its effects while reducing unwanted side effects. But opium wasn't just medicine in ancient Egypt. It was also big business. Egyptian opium preparations became luxury items that were traded throughout the ancient world. Wealthy Romans would pay enormous sums for Egyptian opium formulas, and even the distant kingdoms of Persia and India sought out Egyptian pharmaceutical expertise. This trade made Egypt incredibly wealthy and helped finance the massive building projects that we still marvel at today. The religious applications of opium were even more significant than its medical uses. Egyptian priests discovered that opium could induce states of consciousness that they believed allowed direct communication with the gods. During major religious festivals, specially prepared opium mixtures would be distributed to participants, creating shared mystical experiences that reinforced social bonds and religious beliefs. The most sacred use of opium occurred during mummification processes. The Egyptians believed that consciousness continued after death, and they used opium preparations to ease the soul's transition from the physical world to the spiritual realm. Opium-soaked linen was wrapped around the body, opium resins were placed in the burial chambers, and complex formulas were even injected into the brain cavity through the nose during the mummification process. What's particularly fascinating is how the Egyptians understood opium tolerance and addiction. Ancient medical texts describe detailed observations of patients who had been using opium preparations for extended periods. They noted that these individuals required increasingly larger doses to achieve the same effects, and they developed specific protocols for gradually reducing opium use to prevent what they called divine withdrawal, a condition they recognized could be dangerous and even fatal. Egyptian physicians also developed antidotes for opium overdoses. These formulas typically combined stimulating herbs with substances that could counteract opium's respiratory depression effects. The most effective antidote was a complex mixture that included strong coffee, peppermint oil, and extracts from various plants that modern science has confirmed contain compounds similar to the opioid antagonists used in today's emergency rooms. The quality control methods used for Egyptian opium preparations were remarkably advanced. Each batch would be tested by trained physician priests who could identify the exact potency and purity based on taste, smell, and appearance. They developed standardized measurement systems and maintained detailed records of which preparations worked best for different conditions. This level of pharmaceutical oversight wouldn't be seen again until the development of modern drug regulation in the 20th century. Royal opium preparations were in a class by themselves. The pharaoh's personal physicians would spend months creating single doses of specialized opium formulas for specific purposes. Some were designed to enhance creativity and decision-making abilities. Others were formulated to provide prophetic dreams that could guide important political and military decisions. The most exclusive preparations were reserved for the pharaoh's own use during sacred ceremonies where he communicated directly with the gods on behalf of all Egypt. The decline of Egyptian opium culture began during the Persian invasion in 525 BCE, when foreign rulers became suspicious of any substances that might enhance Egyptian religious or cultural identity. Many of the traditional preparation methods were suppressed, and the trade networks that had supplied Egypt with high-quality raw opium were disrupted. However, much of the knowledge was preserved in hidden temple libraries and eventually found its way to Greek and Roman physicians who adapted Egyptian methods for their own use. But perhaps the most shocking aspect of Egyptian opium culture was its use in what they called living mummification ceremonies. These were rituals where individuals who were near death would be given massive doses of specially prepared opium mixtures designed to ease their transition to the afterlife, while allowing them to remain conscious long enough to communicate their experiences to attending priests. These accounts were carefully recorded and formed the basis for much of Egyptian belief about life after death. Modern archaeological discoveries have confirmed many aspects of ancient Egyptian opium use. Recent analysis of residues found in tomb vessels has revealed the presence of opium alkaloids in concentrations that suggest highly sophisticated purification and preparation techniques. Some of these preparations are so complex that modern chemists are still trying to figure out exactly how the Egyptians achieved such purity using only ancient technology. The legacy of Egyptian opium culture extends far beyond ancient history. Many of the preparation techniques developed by Egyptian physicians were preserved in Arabic medical texts during the Islamic Golden Age and eventually made their way to medieval Europe. Some of the terminology we still use in modern pharmacology can be traced back to ancient Egyptian hieroglyphic terms for opium and its effects. But opium wasn't the only powerful plant that Egyptian sleep masters had at their disposal. In the gardens and wild spaces around Egyptian cities grew another plant that was both common enough for everyday use and powerful enough to transport users to otherworldly realms. Chapter 4. Mandrake's Mysterious Egyptian Secrets. What plant was so terrifying that ancient Egyptians believed it would scream when pulled from the earth, yet so valuable that they risked their lives to harvest it for the most important sleep rituals in their civilization? The answer is mandrake, a mysterious plant that bridged the gap between medicine and magic in ways that still puzzle scientists today. Mandrake, scientifically known as Mandragora officinarum, doesn't look like much at first glance. Growing low to the ground with broad, dark green leaves arranged in a rosette pattern, it could easily be mistaken for a common garden plant. But beneath the surface lies a thick, fleshy root that often grows in shapes resembling human figures, complete with what appear to be arms, legs, and even facial features. This uncanny resemblance to the human form made mandrake one of the most feared and revered plants in the ancient world. The Egyptians discovered mandrake's properties around 2000 BCE, but their relationship with this plant was complicated from the beginning. Unlike other sleep aids that were relatively safe when properly prepared, mandrake contained powerful alkaloids that could easily kill if the dosage was even slightly wrong. The active compounds, including scopolamine, atropine, and hyoscyamine, are so potent that modern medicine still uses synthetic versions of these chemicals as anesthetics and antispasmodic medications. But how did Egyptian physicians learn to harness such a dangerous plant safely? The answer lies in their development of what they called graduated poisoning techniques. Starting with doses so small they produced no noticeable effects, they would gradually increase the amount while carefully observing the results. This process could take months or even years, but it allowed them to map out the exact dosage ranges that produced desired effects without causing harm. The harvesting of mandrake was surrounded by elaborate rituals designed both to protect the harvester and to ensure the plant's maximum potency. According to Egyptian texts, mandrake could only be safely harvested during specific phases of the moon, preferably during a new moon when the plant's screaming would be muffled by darkness. The harvester would approach the plant while chanting protective spells and would use bronze tools rather than iron ones, believing that iron would anger the plant and make it more dangerous. The most dramatic harvesting method involved tying a rope to the mandrake root and attaching the other end to a dog. The dog would be encouraged to run away, pulling the root from the ground while the harvester covered their ears to avoid hearing the plant's supposed death scream. While this sounds like superstition, modern research suggests there might have been some practical wisdom behind these practices. The ritualized approach ensured that harvesting was done carefully and with proper respect for the plant's dangerous properties. Once safely harvested, mandrake roots would undergo an elaborate preparation process that could take weeks. The roots would be cleaned, sliced, and dried using specific temperature and humidity conditions that maximized the concentration of active alkaloids while breaking down some of the more toxic compounds. The dried root would then be ground into powder and mixed with various other substances that enhanced its effects or reduced its toxicity. Egyptian physicians developed dozens of different mandrake preparations for various purposes. For sleep disorders, they created what they called twilight medicines that induced a state of consciousness somewhere between waking and sleeping. Users reported being able to think clearly and remain aware of their surroundings while experiencing vivid hallucinations and profound alterations in their perception of time and space. The most sophisticated mandrake preparations were reserved for surgical procedures. Egyptian surgeons realized that mandrake could not only eliminate pain, but also create a state of complete unconsciousness that allowed them to perform complex operations that would otherwise be impossible. Surgical papyri describe procedures using mandrake anesthesia that included brain surgery, cataract removal, and even heart operations that wouldn't be attempted again until the modern era. But mandrake's role in Egyptian society extended far beyond medicine. The plant became central to fertility rituals, love magic, and divination practices. Egyptian women would carry small pieces of mandrake root as amulets to promote pregnancy, and couples planning to conceive would consume carefully prepared mandrake potions, believed to enhance fertility and ensure healthy offspring. The connection between mandrake and fertility wasn't just superstition. Modern research has shown that the plant's alkaloids can affect hormone production and reproductive function. While the mechanisms aren't fully understood, there's scientific evidence that mandrake preparations can influence fertility in ways that the ancient Egyptians somehow figured out through centuries of careful observation and experimentation. Royal uses of mandrake were shrouded in even greater mystery. Palace texts describe special ceremonies where the pharaoh would consume mandrake preparations before making crucial decisions about war, trade, or religious policy. These vision quests could last for days, during which the pharaoh would be attended by specially trained priests who would record everything he said or did while under the influence. Many of the most important decisions in Egyptian history may have been made during these mandrake-induced altered states. The preparation of royal mandrake formulas was considered one of the highest forms of pharmaceutical art. Master physician priests would spend their entire careers perfecting recipes that balanced the plant's psychoactive effects with its toxicity. The most prized formulas were said to produce visions so clear and meaningful that they were indistinguishable from direct communication with the gods. Egyptian mandrake culture also included sophisticated antidote protocols for overdoses. These emergency treatments typically involved inducing vomiting, administering stimulating herbs, and providing what they called grounding medicines that helped bring users back to normal consciousness. The most effective antidotes were complex mixtures that included strong coffee, peppermint, and various other plants that modern science has confirmed contain compounds that can counteract mandrake's toxic effects. The quality and potency of mandrake varied dramatically depending on where and how it was grown. Egyptian agricultural texts describe specific soil conditions, irrigation schedules, and harvesting techniques that produced the most potent plants. The best mandrake was said to come from plants grown in soil that had been enriched with specific types of animal dung and watered with Nile floodwater during particular seasons. The trade in Egyptian mandrake was incredibly lucrative, but also extremely dangerous. Merchants who dealt in mandrake preparations had to be licensed by the government and were required to undergo extensive training in handling and storage techniques. The penalties for selling adulterated or improperly prepared mandrake were severe, including exile or even execution, because the Egyptian authorities understood how easily these preparations could kill if they weren't properly made. Archaeological evidence has confirmed many aspects of Egyptian mandrake use. Recent discoveries of ancient pharmacy sites have revealed sophisticated equipment for processing mandrake root, including specialized grinding tools, filtration systems, and storage containers designed to preserve the plant's potency. Chemical analysis of residues found in these containers has confirmed the presence of mandrake alkaloids in concentrations that suggest highly advanced preparation techniques. The decline of mandrake use in Egypt began during the Greco-Roman period, when foreign physicians introduced alternative anesthetics and sleep aids that were considered safer and more predictable. However, knowledge of Egyptian mandrake preparations was preserved in various forms and eventually spread throughout the Mediterranean world, influencing medical practices in Greece, Rome, and eventually medieval Europe. But perhaps the most intriguing aspect of Egyptian mandrake culture was its use in what they called shared dreaming ceremonies. These were rituals where multiple participants would consume carefully calibrated doses of mandrake preparations and then sleep together in specially prepared chambers. The goal was to enter the same dream space and communicate with each other on a spiritual level. While modern science can't confirm whether such shared dreaming is actually possible, historical accounts describe these ceremonies in remarkable detail, suggesting they were real practices that produced meaningful experiences for participants. The legacy of Egyptian mandrake knowledge extends far beyond ancient history. Many of the alkaloids first isolated from mandrake by Egyptian physicians are still used in modern medicine today. Scopolamine is used as a motion sickness remedy and sedative. Atropine is a standard emergency room drug for certain types of poisoning, and hyoscyamine is used to treat various gastrointestinal disorders. In a very real sense, every time a modern patient receives one of these medications, they're benefiting from pharmaceutical knowledge that was first developed by ancient Egyptian physician priests over 4,000 years ago. But mandrake wasn't the only surprising plant in the Egyptian sleep arsenal. In fact, one of their most important sleep aids was so common that you probably have it in your refrigerator right now. Chapter 5. The Surprising Secret of Egyptian Lettuce Sleep Medicine. Would you believe that the same leafy green you put in your salad was once considered so powerful by ancient Egyptians that they depicted their gods consuming it for strength and virility? Wild lettuce, or Lactuca virosa, was one of Egypt's most important and widely used sleep aids, and its story reveals how the Egyptians could find extraordinary properties in the most ordinary-looking plants. The discovery of wild lettuce's sleep-inducing properties likely came from Egyptian farmers who noticed that workers harvesting the plant during hot summer days would become drowsy and relaxed. Unlike the lettuce we eat today, which has been bred for crisp leaves and mild flavour, ancient Egyptian wild lettuce contained high concentrations of a milky sap called lactucarium that oozed from the plant when it was cut or damaged. This milky sap wasn't just any plant juice. Lactucarium contains a complex mixture of compounds that have genuine psychoactive effects. When dried and concentrated, lactucarium produces a brownish resin that 19th century physicians called lettuce opium because of its remarkable similarity to real opium in both appearance and effects. The active compounds, including lactocopicrin, lactucin, and various sesquiterpene lactones, can produce mild euphoria, reduce anxiety, and promote deep, restful sleep. But here's what makes the Egyptian approach to lettuce medicine so sophisticated. They didn't just harvest the sap randomly. Instead, they developed specific cultivation techniques designed to maximize lactucarium production. Wild lettuce plants were grown in special gardens where they were subjected to controlled stress that increased sap production. The plants would be partially damaged at strategic points during their growth cycle, causing them to produce more of the milky substance as a defensive response. The harvesting process was equally refined. Egyptian texts describe detailed procedures for collecting lactucarium at specific times of day when the sap flow was at its peak. The best collection time was said to be just before dawn, when the plants had been producing sap all night but hadn't yet been affected by the day's heat. Harvesters would make careful incisions in the stems and leaves, allowing the milky sap to ooze out and dry into the resin that could be collected and processed. The processing of lactucarium was considered a skilled craft that required years of training to master. The raw sap would be collected and allowed to dry into small, brownish chunks that looked remarkably similar to opium. These chunks would then be further purified through a complex series of heating, cooling, and filtering steps that removed impurities while concentrating the active compounds. The final product was a dark, resinous substance that could be stored for years without losing its potency. Egyptian physicians developed dozens of different lettuce-based sleep preparations for various conditions. For simple insomnia, they created mild tinctures that could be dissolved in wine or water. For more severe sleep disorders, they produced concentrated extracts that were much more potent. The most sophisticated preparations combined lactucarium with other herbs to create synergistic effects that enhanced sleep quality, while reducing the grogginess that sometimes occurred the morning after use. The religious and cultural significance of lettuce in Egypt was enormous. The plant was sacred to Min, the god of fertility and sexual potency, who was often depicted with lettuce plants or consuming lettuce leaves. This association wasn't just symbolic. Egyptian physicians discovered that moderate doses of lettuce preparations could enhance sexual function and fertility, while larger doses promoted deep, restful sleep. This dual nature made lettuce preparations popular for both recreational and medicinal use. Royal lettuce preparations were legendary for their sophistication and potency. Palace texts describe elaborate formulas that combined lactucarium with precious spices, exotic herbs, and even small amounts of gold and silver that were believed to enhance the mixture's spiritual properties. These preparations were so valued that recipes were closely guarded state secrets, and the knowledge of how to prepare them was passed down through generations of royal physicians. The cultivation of medicinal lettuce became a major agricultural industry in ancient Egypt. Entire regions specialized in growing wild lettuce for pharmaceutical use, and the quality of Egyptian lettuce preparations was famous throughout the ancient world. Greek and Roman physicians regularly imported Egyptian lactucarium because they couldn't replicate the high quality achieved by Egyptian cultivation and processing methods. Egyptian agricultural texts reveal sophisticated understanding of how environmental factors affected lactucarium production. They knew that plants grown in certain soil types produced more potent sap, that irrigation with Nile floodwater during specific seasons enhanced alkaloid content, and that controlled stress through partial harvesting actually increased overall yields. This level of agricultural pharmacology wouldn't be seen again until modern times. The medical applications of lettuce preparations were remarkably diverse. In addition to sleep disorders, Egyptian physicians used lactucarium to treat anxiety, digestive problems, respiratory conditions, and various types of pain. They understood that different preparations and dosages produced different therapeutic effects, and they developed detailed treatment protocols for various conditions that read like modern pharmaceutical guidelines. Women's health was a particular area where lettuce medicine excelled. Egyptian medical papyri describe specific formulas for treating menstrual irregularities, childbirth pain, and postpartum depression. Lactucarium's mild hormonal effects made it useful for various gynecological conditions, and its safety profile made it suitable for use during pregnancy and breastfeeding when other, more powerful plant medicines were considered too dangerous. The preparation of lettuce medicines also involved sophisticated quality control procedures. Egyptian physicians developed standardized tests for determining the potency and purity of lactucarium. These included visual inspections, taste tests, and even early forms of chemical analysis using various reagents that would change color in the presence of specific compounds. Preparations that didn't meet strict quality standards were rejected and destroyed rather than sold to unsuspecting patients. The export trade in Egyptian lettuce medicines was enormous and highly profitable. Caravans carrying Egyptian lactucarium would travel throughout the Mediterranean world, Africa, and even as far as India and China. The profits from this trade helped finance many of Egypt's greatest architectural achievements and military expeditions. In a very real sense, some of the pyramids and temples we admire today were built with money earned from selling sleep aids made from lettuce sap. The decline of Egyptian lettuce medicine began during the Roman period, when changing agricultural practices and the introduction of other crops reduced the cultivation of wild lettuce. However, knowledge of lactucarium preparation was preserved in various forms and eventually spread throughout the medieval world. Islamic physicians in particular preserved and expanded upon Egyptian lettuce medicine techniques, and some of their innovations are still used in traditional medicine today. Modern scientific research has confirmed many of the effects that Egyptian physicians attributed to lactucarium. The compound lactucopicrin has been shown to have genuine sedative and analgesic properties. Lactucin can reduce inflammation and promote relaxation, and various other compounds in lettuce sap have been found to have anti-anxiety and sleep-promoting effects that validate thousands of years of traditional use. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Egyptian lettuce medicine was its accessibility. Unlike exotic imports like opium or rare plants like mandrake, wild lettuce could be grown almost anywhere in Egypt. This meant that even common people could benefit from sophisticated sleep medicines that were based on the same principles used in royal preparations. The democratization of sleep medicine through lettuce cultivation may have been one of ancient Egypt's greatest public health achievements. The techniques developed for processing lettuce sap also laid the groundwork for more advanced pharmaceutical preparations. Egyptian physicians learned principles of extraction, purification, and standardization that they applied to many other plants. In a sense, lactucarium processing was a gateway drug that led to the development of increasingly sophisticated pharmaceutical technologies that would eventually encompass hundreds of different medicinal plants. However, the story of Egyptian sleep aids extends far beyond individual plants. The real genius of Egyptian medicine lay in their ability to combine multiple substances into complex formulations that produced effects greater than the sum of their parts. And nowhere was this more evident than in their development of medicated beers that transformed ordinary beverages into powerful sleep medicines. Chapter 6. Sacred Brewing Egyptian Beer as Medicine for the Soul. Can you imagine walking into an ancient Egyptian tavern and ordering a beer that would not only quench your thirst, but also transport you into prophetic dreams and cure your insomnia? Egyptian medicated beers were far more than alcoholic beverages. They were sophisticated pharmaceutical delivery systems that combined the art of brewing with advanced botanical medicine to create some of the most effective sleep aids in the ancient world. Beer wasn't just a drink in ancient Egypt. It was a cornerstone of civilization. Every person, from the lowest laborer to the pharaoh himself, consumed beer daily as their primary source of hydration and nutrition. But Egyptian brewers discovered that the fermentation process could be used to extract and concentrate the active compounds from medicinal plants, creating beers that were simultaneously food, medicine, and spiritual sacrament. The process began with the grain. Egyptian brewers didn't use just any barley or wheat. They cultivated specific varieties that were selected not only for their fermentation properties, but also for their compatibility with medicinal plants. Some grains were chosen because they produced fermentation byproducts that enhanced the absorption of plant alkaloids. Others were selected because they created flavor profiles that masked the bitter taste of powerful medicinal herbs. The brewing process itself was a form of pharmaceutical manufacturing. Master brewers, who were often also physicians or priests, would begin by preparing what they called medicinal mashes. These were combinations of grains, water, and carefully selected plants that would ferment together to create beers with specific therapeutic properties. The timing, temperature, and duration of fermentation were all precisely controlled to maximize the extraction of active compounds from the added plants. For sleep-inducing beers, Egyptian brewers developed formulas that combined multiple sedative plants in carefully balanced proportions. A typical sleep beer might contain blue lotus flowers, wild lettuce sap, poppy seeds, and various other herbs that worked together to produce deep, restful sleep. But the real genius was in understanding how fermentation changed these plants and created new compounds that were more effective than the original ingredients. The fermentation process did several important things. First, it broke down plant cell walls, releasing alkaloids that would otherwise be difficult to extract. Second, it converted some compounds into more active forms through enzymatic processes. Third, it created alcohol, which acted as both a preservative and an absorption enhancer that helped the medicinal compounds enter the bloodstream more quickly. Finally, fermentation produced various organic acids and esters that enhanced flavor and may have had therapeutic effects of their own. But Egyptian medicated beers weren't just random combinations of plants and grain. They were precisely formulated medicines with standardized recipes that were developed through centuries of experimentation. Different breweries specialized in different types of medicinal beers, and the most successful formulas were closely guarded trade secrets that could make their creators wealthy and famous throughout the ancient world. The varieties of medicinal beer available in ancient Egypt were astounding. There were gentle sleep beers for everyday use, powerful dream beers for spiritual practices, stimulating morning beers to counteract grogginess from the night before, and even specialized formulas for specific medical conditions like anxiety, depression, and chronic pain. The most exclusive beers were made for royalty and contained rare and expensive ingredients like frankincense, myrrh, and imported spices. Royal brewers had access to ingredients that ordinary people could never afford. Palace texts describe beer formulas that included gold dust, ground pearls, and extracts from rare plants that grew only in remote parts of the empire. These weren't just status symbols. Egyptian physicians believed that precious metals and stones had therapeutic properties that enhanced the effects of medicinal plants. Modern research has found that some of these additives actually do have pharmacological effects, suggesting that the Egyptians may have been onto something. The brewing facilities themselves were marvels of ancient technology. Large-scale medicinal breweries included sophisticated fermentation chambers with temperature control systems, filtration equipment, and quality testing laboratories where samples were analyzed for potency and purity. The largest breweries could produce thousands of gallons of medicinal beer per day, supplying not only local markets but also export trade throughout the Mediterranean world. Quality control was incredibly important because medicinal beers could be dangerous if improperly made. Too much of certain plants could cause serious poisoning, while too little would render the beer ineffective. Master brewers developed standardized testing procedures that included taste tests, visual inspections, and even early forms of chemical analysis. Beers that didn't meet quality standards were destroyed rather than sold, because the reputation of Egyptian pharmaceutical products was too valuable to risk. The social aspects of medicinal beer consumption were as important as the medical effects. Egyptian taverns weren't just places to drink, they were community health centers where people gathered to share medicinal beers and discuss their effects. Experienced users would advise newcomers about proper dosages and what to expect, creating informal support networks that helped ensure safe and effective use of these powerful substances. Religious ceremonies often centered around the consumption of sacred beers that were specially brewed for specific occasions. The Festival of Drunkenness, dedicated to the goddess Hathor, featured beers that were designed to induce the specific altered states of consciousness associated with divine communication. Participants would consume these sacred brews and enter trance-like states that were believed to allow direct interaction with gods and goddesses. The economic impact of medicinal beer production was enormous. Brewing was one of Egypt's most important industries, providing employment for thousands of people and generating substantial tax revenues for the government. The export of Egyptian medicinal beers brought in foreign currency and helped establish trade relationships with distant countries. Some historians believe that Egypt's wealth and power during certain periods was largely based on their monopoly over advanced brewing technologies. Women played crucial roles in medicinal beer production. Many brewers were women who had inherited their knowledge from mothers and grandmothers, creating brewing dynasties that lasted for centuries. Some of the most famous medicinal beer formulas were created by women who combined traditional brewing techniques with innovative pharmaceutical approaches. These female brewers were highly respected in Egyptian society and often served as unofficial community health advisors. The medical applications of beer-based medicines were incredibly diverse. Egyptian physicians prescribed specific beers for digestive problems, respiratory conditions, skin diseases, and mental health issues. They understood that the combination of alcohol, fermentation byproducts, and plant medicines created synergistic effects that were often more powerful than any single ingredient alone. Some conditions responded better to beer-based medicines than to any other treatment available at the time. The preparation of medicinal beers also involved sophisticated timing considerations. Different plants were added at different stages of the brewing process to achieve optimal extraction of their active compounds. Some herbs were added during the initial mashing phase, others during fermentation, and still others just before serving. This sequential addition process allowed brewers to maximize the therapeutic potential of each ingredient while creating complex flavor profiles that made the medicines more palatable. Archaeological discoveries have provided remarkable insights into ancient Egyptian brewing practices. Excavations of brewery sites have revealed sophisticated equipment, including copper fermentation vessels, ceramic filtration systems, and even primitive distillation apparatus that may have been used to concentrate certain medicinal preparations. Chemical analysis of residues found in ancient beer vessels has confirmed the presence of various plant alkaloids, validating historical accounts of medicinal brewing practices. The decline of Egyptian medicinal brewing began during the Roman occupation, when foreign authorities became concerned about the social and political implications of substances that could alter consciousness and create strong community bonds among Egyptians. Many traditional brewing formulas were suppressed or driven underground, and the sophisticated quality control systems that had ensured the safety and efficacy of medicinal beers were dismantled. However, much of the knowledge was preserved in other forms. Islamic physicians during the medieval period adapted many Egyptian brewing techniques for their own medicinal preparations, often substituting non-alcoholic fermentation processes that could achieve similar results without violating religious prohibitions against alcohol consumption. Some of these adapted formulas are still used in traditional medicine today. Modern research has confirmed that fermentation can indeed enhance the bioavailability and therapeutic effects of many medicinal plants. The process of controlled fermentation breaks down complex molecules into more absorbable forms, creates beneficial enzymes and organic acids, and can even produce new therapeutic compounds that don't exist in the original plants. In many ways, ancient Egyptian brewers were pioneers of what we now call pharmaceutical biotechnology. The legacy of Egyptian medicinal brewing extends far beyond the ancient world. Many of the principles developed by Egyptian brewers, including the use of fermentation to extract and concentrate plant medicines, the importance of quality control and standardization, and the understanding that combinations of substances can be more effective than individual components, form the foundation of modern pharmaceutical manufacturing. But the most comprehensive record of Egyptian pharmaceutical knowledge wasn't written on brewery walls or temple inscriptions. It was preserved in one of humanity's most important medical documents, a papyrus scroll that contains the distilled wisdom of thousands of years of Egyptian medical practice and continues to influence medicine today. Chapter 7. The Ebers Papyrus Unlocking Ancient Egypt's Pharmaceutical Codex. What if I told you that buried in an ancient Egyptian tomb for over 3,000 years was a medical textbook so advanced that modern doctors are still learning from it today? The Ebers Papyrus, discovered in 1872 and dating to approximately 1550 BCE, is one of humanity's most important medical documents, containing over 800 prescriptions and medical procedures that reveal the incredible sophistication of ancient Egyptian pharmaceutical knowledge. This isn't just any old papyrus scroll. At over 68 feet long and containing 328 different medicinal ingredients, the Ebers Papyrus represents the collected medical wisdom of an entire civilization. But what makes it truly remarkable for our story is the detailed attention it pays to sleep disorders and the dozens of sophisticated remedies it provides for insomnia, nightmares, and other sleep-related problems. The papyrus opens with what modern doctors would recognize as a systematic classification of diseases and their treatments. But the Egyptian approach was far more holistic than modern medicine. They understood that sleep problems were often connected to other physical, mental, and spiritual issues, and their treatments reflected this comprehensive understanding. Rather than just prescribing a single sleep aid, Egyptian physicians would create complex treatment regimens that addressed all aspects of a patient's health. For simple insomnia, the Ebers Papyrus recommends what it calls gentle sleep inducers. These were mild preparations made from plants like chamomile, valerian, and wild lettuce that could promote relaxation without causing grogginess the next day. But the instructions go far beyond just listing ingredients. The papyrus provides detailed guidance on when to harvest each plant, how to prepare them, what proportions to use, and even what time of day the medicine should be taken for maximum effectiveness. More severe sleep disorders required more powerful interventions. The papyrus describes elaborate preparations that combine multiple psychoactive plants in carefully balanced formulas. One prescription for what appears to be severe chronic insomnia calls for opium, mandrake root, blue lotus flowers, and several other sedative plants to be combined with honey and wine, then aged for specific periods under controlled conditions that would maximize the extraction of active compounds while minimizing toxicity. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of the Ebers Papyrus is its treatment of what we would now call sleep disorders related to mental health. The ancient Egyptians recognized that anxiety, depression, and trauma could all cause sleep problems, and they developed specific treatments for each condition. These weren't just pharmaceutical approaches either. The papyrus describes complex therapeutic regimens that included counseling, spiritual practices, dietary modifications, and environmental changes alongside medicinal treatments. The diagnostic procedures described in the papyrus are remarkably sophisticated. Egyptian physicians were trained to conduct detailed interviews with patients about their sleep patterns, dreams, daily routines, and emotional states. They would examine the patient's physical condition, check for signs of other diseases that might be affecting sleep, and even consider environmental factors like the patient's living conditions and work schedule. This holistic approach to diagnosis ensured that treatments addressed the root causes of sleep problems rather than just masking symptoms. The preparation instructions in the papyrus reveal an understanding of pharmaceutical chemistry that was centuries ahead of its time. Different extraction methods were recommended for different types of plants. Some medicines required cold water extraction, others used hot water, and still others called for alcohol or oil-based preparations. The papyrus explains that these different solvents extract different types of active compounds, and that the choice of extraction method should be based on the specific therapeutic effects desired. Quality control procedures described in the papyrus are equally impressive. Each batch of medicine was to be tested by the preparing physician to ensure proper potency and purity. The papyrus provides detailed descriptions of what properly prepared medicines should look like, smell like, and taste like. It also describes various tests that could be performed to verify that medicines contained the expected active ingredients and hadn't been contaminated or degraded during storage. The dosing instructions in the papyrus reflect a sophisticated understanding of individual variation in drug response. Rather than providing one-size-fits-all dosages, the papyrus gives detailed guidance for adjusting doses based on the patient's age, weight, overall health, and severity of symptoms. It also provides clear instructions for gradually increasing or decreasing doses to achieve optimal therapeutic effects while minimizing side effects. Safety considerations were paramount in Egyptian pharmaceutical practice, and the papyrus dedicates considerable attention to the potential dangers of medicinal plants. It provides detailed descriptions of overdose symptoms for various substances and gives specific instructions for treating poisoning cases. The papyrus also identifies which medicines should never be used together because of dangerous interactions, demonstrating an understanding of drug interactions that predates modern pharmacology by thousands of years. The papyrus also reveals the existence of a sophisticated medical education system in ancient Egypt. It describes the training that physicians were required to undergo before they could prescribe sleep medicines, including extensive study of plant properties, preparation techniques, and patient evaluation methods. The most complex sleep disorder treatments could only be prescribed by master physicians who had completed years of specialized training under experienced mentors. Royal treatments described in the papyrus were in a class by themselves. These elaborate preparations often took months to create and involved ingredients from throughout the known world. One formula for treating the pharaoh's insomnia calls for over 30 different plants, minerals, and animal products to be combined in a specific sequence over a period of several weeks. The resulting preparation was said to not only cure sleep problems, but also enhance mental clarity, physical strength, and spiritual awareness. The papyrus provides fascinating insights into Egyptian understanding of dreams and their significance. Different types of dreams were believed to require different types of treatment. Prophetic dreams were to be encouraged through specific preparations that enhanced dream recall and vividness. Nightmares required different formulas designed to calm the mind and protect against evil spiritual influences. The papyrus even describes medicines that were supposed to allow people to control their dreams and communicate with deceased relatives or gods. Women's sleep issues received special attention in the papyrus. It describes specific formulations for treating sleep problems related to menstruation, pregnancy, and menopause. These preparations took into account the hormonal changes that could affect sleep and included ingredients that were believed to balance feminine energy and promote reproductive health. Some of these formulations are remarkably similar to modern hormone therapy approaches. The papyrus also addresses sleep problems in children and elderly patients. Pediatric formulations were significantly different from adult preparations, with lower doses of active ingredients and the addition of substances that would improve taste and reduce the likelihood of adverse effects. Geriatric preparations took into account the slower metabolism and increased sensitivity to medications that come with advanced age. Archaeological evidence has confirmed many of the practices described in the Ebers Papyrus. Excavations of ancient Egyptian pharmacy sites have revealed equipment and ingredients that match the papyrus descriptions exactly. Chemical analysis of residues found in ancient medicine containers has verified the presence of the specific plant compounds mentioned in papyrus formulas, proving that these weren't just theoretical prescriptions but actual medicines that were prepared and used by Egyptian physicians. The preservation and transmission of the knowledge contained in the Ebers Papyrus was a remarkable achievement in itself. The papyrus was carefully copied multiple times over the centuries, with each generation of scribes adding their own observations and modifications based on clinical experience. This iterative process of improvement and refinement continued for over 1,000 years, creating a body of pharmaceutical knowledge that represented the accumulated wisdom of dozens of generations of Egyptian physicians. The decline of the medical traditions described in the Ebers Papyrus began during the Persian and Greek invasions of Egypt, when foreign rulers imposed their own medical practices and suppressed traditional Egyptian methods. However, much of the knowledge was preserved in modified forms, and some of the techniques described in the papyrus continued to be used in remote parts of Egypt well into the Islamic period. Modern research has validated many of the treatments described in the Ebers Papyrus. Scientific studies have confirmed that many of the plants recommended for sleep disorders do indeed contain compounds with sedative, anxiolytic, and sleep-promoting properties. Some of the combination therapies described in the papyrus have been found to be more effective than the individual components alone, validating the Egyptian understanding of synergistic drug interactions. The influence of the Ebers Papyrus extends far beyond ancient Egypt. Greek physicians like Hippocrates and Galen studied Egyptian medical texts and incorporated many Egyptian ideas into their own practices. Roman military doctors used Egyptian-inspired treatments to help soldiers deal with combat trauma and sleep disorders. During the Islamic Golden Age, Arab physicians preserved and translated Egyptian medical knowledge, ensuring that it would influence medical practice throughout the medieval world. Today, pharmaceutical researchers are increasingly interested in the complex multi-plant formulations described in the Ebers Papyrus. Modern drug discovery often focuses on isolated single compounds, but the Egyptian approach of combining multiple plants in carefully balanced formulas may offer advantages for treating complex conditions like sleep disorders. Some modern sleep medications are actually based on principles first described in ancient Egyptian texts, though few people realize this connection. But the Ebers Papyrus represents just one aspect of Egyptian pharmaceutical knowledge. The real test of any medical system is how it performs in practice, and Egyptian sleep medicines were put to the ultimate test in the tombs and burial chambers, where they were expected to ease the transition from life to death and ensure peaceful rest for eternity. Chapter 8: Archaeological Evidence, Egyptian Sleep Aids in the Afterlife. What happens when you combine the world's most advanced archaeological techniques with ancient Egyptian burial sites? You get shocking discoveries that prove Egyptian sleep aids were far more sophisticated and widely used than anyone ever imagined. Recent archaeological findings are rewriting the history of ancient pharmaceuticals and revealing secrets that have been buried for thousands of years. In 2019, researchers at Yale University made a discovery that sent shockwaves through the archaeological world. Using advanced chemical analysis techniques on ancient Egyptian alabaster vessels housed in museum collections, they found definitive proof of opium use, dating back over 2,500 years. But this wasn't just any opium. The chemical signatures suggested highly sophisticated purification and preparation techniques that rivaled anything available until the modern era. The breakthrough came from studying vessels that had been sitting in museum storage for over a century. Previous generations of archaeologists had focused on the artistic and cultural significance of these beautiful alabaster containers, but they hadn't had the technology to analyze their contents at the molecular level. Modern mass spectrometry and chromatographic analysis revealed the presence of specific opium alkaloids in concentrations that could only have come from deliberate pharmaceutical preparations. But the Yale discovery was just the beginning. When researchers realized that chemical analysis could reveal the contents of ancient vessels, they began examining collections around the world. What they found was evidence of a vast, ancient pharmaceutical industry that had been completely invisible to earlier generations of scholars. Vessels from museums in Egypt, Europe, and America all showed traces of sophisticated plant-based medicines. The most shocking discoveries came from the tomb of Tutankhamun. When Howard Carter opened the famous tomb in 1922, he found dozens of alabaster vessels containing dark, aromatic substances. At the time, Carter's team assumed these were perfumes or cosmetics. But recent reanalysis of samples taken during the original excavation has revealed something far more significant. These vessels contained complex pharmaceutical preparations that included opium, mandrake, blue lotus, and several other psychoactive plants. The implications are staggering. If King Tutankhamun was buried with sophisticated sleep aids and consciousness-altering medicines, what does that say about ancient Egyptian beliefs about death and the afterlife? The evidence suggests that the Egyptians expected consciousness to continue after death, and that they provided the deceased with pharmaceutical tools to navigate the spiritual realm. The chemical analysis techniques being used are incredibly sophisticated. Researchers can now identify not only which plants were used, but also how they were processed. Different preparation methods leave distinct chemical fingerprints, allowing scientists to reconstruct ancient pharmaceutical techniques with remarkable precision. What they're finding is that Egyptian medicine was far more advanced than anyone previously imagined. For example, analysis of residues from a 3,000-year-old vessel revealed traces of a preparation that appears to have been made through a complex distillation process. The concentration and purity of the active compounds suggest that Egyptian chemists had developed techniques for isolating and concentrating plant alkaloids that wouldn't be rediscovered until the 19th century. This level of pharmaceutical sophistication challenges our entire understanding of ancient technology. The geographical distribution of these discoveries is equally revealing. Egyptian pharmaceutical preparations have been found not only in Egypt, but throughout the ancient world. Vessels containing Egyptian-style sleep medicines have been discovered in Greece, Rome, Persia, and even as far away as India and China. This suggests that Egypt was the center of an international pharmaceutical trade that distributed advanced medicines throughout the known world. Some of the most intriguing finds have come from ordinary burial sites rather than royal tombs. Chemical analysis of vessels from middle-class graves has revealed that sophisticated sleep medicines weren't just for pharaohs and nobles. Ordinary Egyptians also had access to advanced pharmaceutical preparations, suggesting that Egypt had developed something approaching a modern healthcare system that could provide effective medicines to people at all social levels. The preservation of these chemical traces is remarkable in itself. Under normal circumstances, organic compounds would have degraded completely over thousands of years. But the dry desert climate of Egypt and the sealed environment of tombs created perfect conditions for preserving molecular evidence of ancient pharmaceutical practices. In some cases, the chemical signatures are so well preserved that researchers can determine not only what plants were used, but also when they were harvested and how long they were stored before use. Recent excavations in the Valley of the Kings have uncovered what appears to be an ancient pharmaceutical manufacturing facility. The site contains specialized equipment for processing medicinal plants, including grinding stones designed for specific types of seeds and roots, ceramic vessels with complex filtration systems, and even primitive distillation apparatus. Chemical analysis of residues from this equipment has confirmed that it was used to produce the same types of sophisticated preparations found in royal tombs. The scale of this pharmaceutical industry was enormous. Excavations of ancient Egyptian cities have revealed dozens of sites that appear to have been involved in medicinal plant processing. These weren't small, family-run operations. They were large-scale manufacturing facilities that could have produced medicines for thousands of people. The economic implications are staggering. Egypt's wealth and power may have been built as much on pharmaceutical expertise as on gold and grain. The international trade in Egyptian medicines is documented not only by archaeological evidence but also by ancient texts from other civilizations. Babylonian, Greek, and Roman sources all mention importing expensive medicines from Egypt. These texts describe Egyptian pharmaceutical preparations as the finest available anywhere in the ancient world, and they often specifically mention sleep aids and consciousness-altering substances. One of the most significant recent discoveries came from a previously unexplored tomb in Saqqara. This burial site, which dates to around 1400 BCE, contained over 200 vessels with traces of different pharmaceutical preparations. Chemical analysis revealed evidence for at least 50 different medicinal formulas, many of which contained combinations of plants that modern pharmacology has confirmed work synergistically to enhance sleep and relaxation. The sophistication of these ancient formulas is breathtaking. One preparation found in the Saqqara tomb contained opium, blue lotus, mandrake, and wild lettuce in precise proportions that modern sleep researchers would recognize as an ideal combination for inducing deep, restorative sleep while minimizing next-day grogginess. The fact that ancient Egyptian physicians figured out these optimal combinations through trial and error over centuries demonstrates a level of systematic pharmaceutical research that rivals modern drug development. Perhaps most remarkably, some of these ancient preparations appear to have been more effective than modern sleep medications. Analysis of the chemical compositions suggests that Egyptian physicians had learned to combine multiple plants in ways that enhanced their individual effects while reducing side effects. This approach of using complex, multi-component formulations is now being studied by modern pharmaceutical companies as a potentially superior alternative to single-compound drugs. The preservation techniques used by Egyptian pharmaceutical manufacturers were also incredibly advanced. Chemical analysis has revealed evidence for various antimicrobial preservatives that kept medicine stable for years or even decades. Some preparations show evidence of having been aged like wine, with chemical changes over time that appear to have enhanced their therapeutic properties. The quality control methods used by ancient Egyptian pharmaceutical manufacturers are evidenced by the remarkable consistency of chemical compositions across different sites and time periods. Preparations for the same conditions show very similar chemical profiles, even when they were made decades apart in different locations. This suggests that Egyptian pharmaceutical manufacturing followed standardized protocols that ensured consistent quality and potency. The discovery of these ancient pharmaceutical preparations is revolutionizing our understanding of the development of medicine. Rather than being a gradual progression from primitive herbal remedies to modern pharmaceuticals, the evidence suggests that some ancient civilizations achieved levels of pharmaceutical sophistication that were then lost and only rediscovered in recent centuries. Egypt may have been the first truly pharmaceutical civilization, with specialized manufacturing facilities, international trade networks, and standardized quality control systems. Modern efforts to recreate some of these ancient formulations have produced surprising results. When prepared using traditional methods, some Egyptian sleep aid formulas have been found to be remarkably effective. This has led to renewed interest in traditional pharmaceutical knowledge and has sparked research into whether ancient formulations might offer advantages over modern single-compound medications. The archaeological evidence for Egyptian sleep aids extends beyond just chemical analysis. Excavations have also revealed sophisticated medical instruments, including specialized mortars and pestles designed for grinding specific types of seeds and roots, ceramic vessels with complex internal structures for filtration and separation, and even primitive laboratory equipment that appears to have been used for extracting and concentrating active compounds from plants. The international influence of Egyptian pharmaceutical knowledge is documented by archaeological finds throughout the ancient world. Sites in Greece, Rome, and other civilizations have yielded vessels and equipment that appear to be copies of Egyptian pharmaceutical technology. This suggests that Egypt's pharmaceutical innovations spread throughout the ancient world, influencing medical practices in civilizations that lasted long after Egypt's decline. But perhaps the most intriguing aspect of these archaeological discoveries is what they suggest about ancient Egyptian beliefs about consciousness and the afterlife. The fact that sophisticated sleep aids, and psychoactive medicines were included in burial goods, suggests that the Egyptians expected to need these substances in the afterlife. This implies a remarkably sophisticated understanding of consciousness as something that continues beyond physical death. The story of Egyptian sleep aids doesn't end in ancient tombs, however. In fact, some of the most surprising developments in this field are happening right now, as modern technology intersects with ancient pharmaceutical knowledge in ways that would have seemed like science fiction just a few years ago. Chapter 9. Modern Deceptions. The Fake Blue Lotus Industry Exposed. Have you ever ordered authentic Egyptian Blue Lotus online, only to wonder why it didn't produce the legendary effects described in ancient texts? You're not alone, and there's a shocking reason why modern Blue Lotus products are failing to deliver. Recent scientific investigations have exposed a massive international fraud that's been deceiving consumers for decades, and the truth about what you're actually buying might surprise you. The modern Blue Lotus industry is built on a foundation of lies. When researchers at UC Berkeley decided to investigate the authenticity of Blue Lotus products sold online, they made a disturbing discovery. The vast majority of products marketed as Egyptian Blue Lotus or Nymphaea caerulea are actually completely different plants that have little or no psychoactive properties. In some cases, they're not even water lilies at all. The deception begins with the rarity of authentic Egyptian Blue Lotus. The construction of the Aswan Dam in the 1970 seconds dramatically altered the Nile River ecosystem, destroying much of the natural habitat where true Blue Lotus once grew. Today, genuine Nymphaea caerulea is extremely rare, with only a few botanical gardens in the world maintaining living specimens. This scarcity has created a perfect opportunity for unscrupulous suppliers to pass off common plants as the legendary Egyptian sacred flower. But how did researchers figure out what was really being sold? The answer lies in sophisticated chemical analysis techniques that can identify the exact species of plant being sold and measure the concentrations of psychoactive compounds. When scientists analyzed dozens of products from major online retailers, they found that most contained little or no nuciferine or aporphine, the alkaloids responsible for Blue Lotus's legendary effects. The most common substitute being sold as Blue Lotus is actually Nymphaea alba, the common white water lily that grows throughout Europe and North America. While this plant is certainly a water lily and can even be dried and smoked, it contains virtually none of the psychoactive compounds that made Egyptian Blue Lotus famous. Consumers paying premium prices for authentic Blue Lotus are often getting what amounts to expensive lawn clippings. Even more shocking is the discovery that some products marketed as Blue Lotus don't contain any Nymphaea species at all. Laboratory analysis has found products that contained dried leaves from completely unrelated plants, including common garden flowers, tree leaves, and even grass clippings that had been processed to look like dried lotus petals. The sophistication of this fraud is remarkable, with some suppliers going to great lengths to create products that look authentic but contain no active ingredients whatsoever. The international scope of this deception is staggering. Fake Blue Lotus products are being manufactured and sold from countries around the world, including Thailand, India, China, and even the United States. Many of these operations are sophisticated businesses with professional websites, customer service departments, and marketing materials that make elaborate claims about their products' authenticity and potency. The price markups on these fake products are enormous. Suppliers are buying common plant materials for pennies per pound and selling them as rare Egyptian Blue Lotus for hundreds of dollars per ounce. Some of the most expensive products, marketed as premium-grade sacred lotus, have been found to contain nothing more than dried lettuce leaves or other common plant materials that cost virtually nothing to obtain. The marketing techniques used to sell fake Blue Lotus products are as sophisticated as the deception itself. Professional-looking websites feature elaborate stories about ancient Egyptian wisdom, testimonials from satisfied customers, and detailed descriptions of the consciousness-altering effects that buyers can expect. Some sites even include fake archaeological photographs and fabricated historical documents to support their claims about product authenticity. The health risks of these fake products go beyond simple consumer fraud. Some suppliers have been found to be mixing synthetic drugs into their fake Blue Lotus products to create psychoactive effects that convince customers they're getting the real thing. These adulterants can include dangerous substances like synthetic cannabinoids, research chemicals, and even illegal drugs that pose serious health risks to unsuspecting consumers. Quality control in the fake Blue Lotus industry is virtually non-existent. Products sold by different suppliers under identical marketing claims have been found to contain completely different plant materials. Even products from the same supplier can vary dramatically from batch to batch, suggesting that manufacturers are simply using whatever cheap plant materials they have available rather than following any consistent formulation. The legal situation surrounding fake Blue Lotus is complex. Because Blue Lotus itself isn't a controlled substance in most countries, authorities have been reluctant to investigate what amounts to consumer fraud rather than drug trafficking. This regulatory vacuum has allowed the fake Blue Lotus industry to operate with virtual impunity, creating a situation where consumers have little recourse when they discover they've been deceived. The rise of electronic cigarettes has created new opportunities for Blue Lotus fraud. Suppliers now market Blue Lotus e-liquids and vaporizer-ready lotus extracts that claim to be ideal for use in electronic cigarettes and vaporizers. Laboratory analysis of these products has found that most contain no lotus extracts at all, instead consisting of standard e-liquid ingredients like propylene glycol and vegetable glycerin, with added flavorings and sometimes synthetic drugs to create psychoactive effects. The vaping trend has also led to the development of what suppliers call lotus resins and concentrated extracts that are supposed to be used in specialized vaporizing devices. These products often sell for extremely high prices because they're marketed as highly concentrated versions of the active lotus compounds. However, testing has revealed that most of these concentrates are actually made from common plant resins or even synthetic materials that have been processed to look like authentic plant extracts. Social media has played a major role in spreading misinformation about Blue Lotus products. Instagram, TikTok, and other platforms are filled with users posting about their experiences with various Blue Lotus products, often without realizing that they're not using authentic materials. These posts create a feedback loop where misinformation about effects and authenticity spreads rapidly through online communities. The psychological aspects of Blue Lotus fraud are particularly insidious. Many consumers who purchase fake products report experiencing effects anyway, largely due to placebo effects and the power of suggestion. This creates a situation where satisfied customers leave positive reviews for fake products, further deceiving other potential buyers and making it difficult for genuine researchers and consumers to identify authentic materials. Some of the most sophisticated fraudulent operations have developed elaborate authentication systems that are designed to convince customers they're getting genuine products. These might include fake certificates of authenticity, laboratory analysis reports that claim to verify the presence of active compounds, and even staged photographs that appear to show the products being harvested from authentic lotus plants. The economic impact of Blue Lotus fraud extends beyond just consumer losses. Legitimate researchers and botanical gardens that maintain authentic Blue Lotus specimens find their work undermined by the widespread availability of fake products that convince people that the real plant doesn't have any special properties. This creates a situation where genuine scientific research becomes more difficult because the market has been flooded with ineffective substitutes. International shipping has made Blue Lotus fraud a global phenomenon. Products manufactured in countries with lax consumer protection laws can be easily shipped to consumers anywhere in the world through online marketplaces. This makes it extremely difficult for any single country's regulatory authorities to effectively combat the problem, as the supply chains often cross multiple international borders. The rise of cryptocurrency payments has made it even harder to trace and prosecute Blue Lotus fraudsters. Many suppliers now accept Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, making it difficult for authorities to follow money trails or for consumers to recover funds when they discover they've been defrauded. This has created a perfect storm of conditions that allow fraudulent operations to operate with virtual impunity. Recent legal developments in some countries have begun to address the Blue Lotus fraud problem. Consumer protection agencies in several European countries have started investigating suppliers who make false claims about their products' authenticity and potency. However, these enforcement efforts are often hampered by the international nature of the trade and the difficulty of defining what constitutes authentic Blue Lotus, when even experts sometimes disagree about botanical classifications. The solution to the Blue Lotus fraud problem ultimately lies in consumer education and improved regulatory oversight. Consumers need to understand that authentic Egyptian Blue Lotus is extremely rare and expensive, and that any product claiming to be genuine Blue Lotus at low prices is almost certainly fake. They also need to be aware that even products that produce psychoactive effects may not contain authentic lotus compounds, as many suppliers are adulterating their products with synthetic drugs to create the effects that customers expect. But the story of modern Blue Lotus fraud represents just one aspect of how ancient Egyptian pharmaceutical knowledge is being distorted and exploited in the contemporary world. The intersection of traditional plant medicines with modern technology has created opportunities for both genuine innovation and sophisticated deception that would have been unimaginable to ancient Egyptian physicians. Chapter 10: Electronic Revolution: How Vapers Rediscovered Ancient Egyptian Highs. What happens when you combine 5,000-year-old Egyptian pharmaceutical knowledge with 21st century vaping technology? The answer has created an underground movement that's revolutionizing how people experience ancient plant medicines, but it's also raising serious questions about safety, legality, and the preservation of traditional knowledge. The electronic cigarette revolution began as a way to help people quit smoking tobacco, but it quickly evolved into something much more complex. Vaping enthusiasts discovered that the heating elements in electronic cigarettes could vaporize almost any organic material, opening up possibilities that the original inventors never imagined. It wasn't long before adventurous users began experimenting with the same plants that ancient Egyptians had used for thousands of years. The process is surprisingly straightforward. Plant materials that once required complex preparation methods involving fermentation, distillation, or extraction can now be simply ground up, mixed with standard vaping liquids, and consumed using readily available electronic devices. This has dramatically lowered the barriers to entry for people interested in exploring traditional plant medicines, but it's also created new risks and complications that ancient users never had to consider. The most popular ancient Egyptian plant being used in modern vaping devices is Blue Lotus, despite the authentication problems we discussed in the previous chapter. Even fake Blue Lotus products can produce some effects when vaporized, particularly if they've been adulterated with synthetic compounds. The vaping community has developed extensive forums and social media groups where users share their experiences with different plant preparations and vaping techniques. These modern digital communities function in ways that are remarkably similar to how ancient Egyptian physicians might have shared knowledge, except now the information spreads globally in seconds rather than being carefully guarded in temple schools. The technical modifications that Vapers have made to their devices specifically for ancient plant materials are quite sophisticated. The standard vaping devices sold in shops are optimized for nicotine-based liquids, but enterprising users have modified temperature controls, airflow systems, and coil configurations to better vaporize the alkaloid compounds found in plants like blue lotus, wild lettuce, and other traditional Egyptian sedatives. Some devices now feature digital displays that allow precise temperature control down to individual degrees, enabling users to target the exact boiling points of specific alkaloid compounds they want to extract from their plant materials. The rebuildable dripping atomizer, or RDA as it's known in the vaping community, has become the device of choice for ancient plant enthusiasts. Unlike standard electronic cigarettes where liquid is stored in a tank and slowly wicked to a heating coil, the RDA allows users to directly drip concentrated plant extracts onto hot coils and immediately inhale the resulting vapor. This method is remarkably similar to how ancient Egyptians might have held lotus flowers over charcoal burners and inhaled the smoke, except the temperature control and dosage consistency are far more precise with modern electronic devices. What makes the electronic delivery method so effective is how it bypasses the digestive system entirely. When ancient Egyptians consumed lotus wine or poppy tea, the active compounds had to pass through the stomach and liver before reaching the brain, losing much of their potency in the process. With vaporization, these compounds go directly from the lungs into the bloodstream and reach the brain within seconds. This means far lower doses are needed to achieve the same effects, which ironically makes modern vaping potentially safer than traditional oral consumption methods, at least in terms of total alkaloid exposure. However, this increased efficiency also creates new dangers. The nearly instant onset of effects from vaping makes it much easier to accidentally overdose compared to traditional preparation methods that took 30 to 60 minutes to fully manifest their effects. Ancient Egyptian physicians built careful waiting periods into their administration protocols, specifically to allow time to assess a patient's response before giving additional doses. Modern vapers often lack this patience and discipline, leading to people taking multiple doses in quick succession and experiencing effects far more intense than they anticipated. The legal status of vaping ancient Egyptian plants varies wildly by jurisdiction and creates confusion for both users and law enforcement. In most places, the plants themselves remain legal to purchase and possess, as do electronic vaping devices. However, the act of vaporizing and inhaling these materials sometimes falls into legal grey areas. Some jurisdictions treat it as analogous to smoking tobacco and apply the same restrictions on where and when it can be done. Others classify it as drug paraphernalia if the substances being vaporized have psychoactive properties. This legal uncertainty has led to several high-profile court cases that have forced judges to grapple with questions that would have seemed absurd just a decade ago. Is it illegal to vaporize a 5,000-year-old sleep aid that was used by pharaohs? Does it matter if the plant material is authentic or fake? What if synthetic compounds have been added to enhance the effects? These questions don't fit neatly into existing drug laws that were written long before anyone imagined the possibility of electronically vaporizing ancient botanical medicines. The medical community is only beginning to understand the health implications of vaping ancient Egyptian plants. While we have good data on the safety profiles of these plants, when consumed orally in their traditional forms, virtually no research exists on what happens when their alkaloid compounds are heat vaporized and inhaled. The temperatures required to vaporize these compounds might create new chemical reactions that produce byproducts that don't exist in traditional preparations. The effects of regularly inhaling these substances into lung tissue, as opposed to absorbing them through the digestive tract, remain largely unknown. Some preliminary research has raised concerning questions. Studies have found that vaporizing certain plant alkaloids can create oxidized compounds that are potentially harmful to lung tissue. The propylene glycol and vegetable glycerin, used as carrier liquids in vaping solutions, can also break down at high temperatures to create formaldehyde and other toxic substances. When these carrier liquids are mixed with complex plant extracts containing dozens of different alkaloid compounds, the potential for unpredictable chemical interactions increases dramatically. But despite these concerns, the popularity of vaping ancient Egyptian plants continues to grow, driven partly by people seeking natural alternatives to pharmaceutical sleep aids and partly by curiosity about traditional psychoactive practices. Online vendors have sprung up offering pre-mixed vaping liquids infused with blue lotus extract, wild lettuce concentrate, and other traditional Egyptian sedatives. These products often come with elaborate claims about their historical authenticity and spiritual benefits, though as we've seen, such claims should be viewed with considerable skepticism. The cultural appropriation issues surrounding this practice are complex and deserve serious consideration. Ancient Egyptian sleep aids weren't just medical treatments, they were deeply embedded in religious and spiritual practices that took years of training to properly understand and administer. When modern vapers extract these practices from their cultural context and reduce them to recreational drug use, something important is lost. The spiritual frameworks that helped ancient users integrate their experiences and avoid abuse don't transfer automatically to contemporary users who may lack any connection to Egyptian religious traditions. Some modern practitioners of Kemetic religion, which seeks to revive ancient Egyptian spiritual practices, have expressed concerns about the commercialization and trivialization of sacred plants. They argue that blue lotus and similar substances were never meant for casual recreational use, but were carefully integrated into specific religious ceremonies under the guidance of trained priests. The widespread availability of these plants through internet vendors and their consumption through electronic devices represents a fundamental misunderstanding of their original purpose and proper use. Nevertheless, there are also voices within the psychedelic research community who argue that modern technology might actually allow us to use these ancient plants more safely and effectively than ever before. The precise dosage control offered by modern vaping devices, combined with contemporary knowledge of pharmacology and neuroscience, could theoretically allow for therapeutic applications that even ancient Egyptian physicians couldn't achieve. Some researchers are exploring whether vaporized blue lotus alkaloids might have potential as treatments for anxiety, depression, or sleep disorders, though this research is still in very early stages. The intersection of ancient wisdom and modern technology in the realm of sleep aids raises profound questions about progress and tradition. Are we improving upon ancient practices by making them more efficient and accessible, or are we losing something essential by removing them from their original cultural and spiritual context? The answer probably lies somewhere between these extremes, but it's a conversation we need to have as these practices become more widespread. Chapter 11. The Grand Egyptian Museum Revelation. What King Tut's alabaster jars really contained. Why would ancient tomb robbers risk death to steal the contents of alabaster jars from King Tutankhamun's burial chamber? The answer to this question has puzzled Egyptologists for a century, but groundbreaking research conducted in 2025 has finally revealed what made those mysterious brown sticky substances so valuable that criminals would brave curses and execution to obtain them. The revelation has fundamentally changed our understanding of opiate use in ancient Egypt. When Howard Carter opened Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922, he discovered an astonishing array of treasures that captured the world's imagination. Golden masks, jeweled ornaments, and elaborate furniture filled the chambers. But among these spectacular finds were dozens of alabaster vessels containing dark, aromatic organic materials that Carter and his team couldn't identify. These vessels had clearly been important enough to accompany the pharaoh into the afterlife, and ancient thieves had considered their contents valuable enough to risk everything trying to steal them. The early chemical analysis conducted by Alfred Lucas in 1933 couldn't determine exactly what these substances were, but Lucas noted something peculiar that has proven prophetic. He concluded that whatever was in these jars, it wasn't simply perfume or cosmetic ointment as most people assumed. The substances had properties that didn't match any of the normal unguents or aromatic oils that would have been common in ancient Egypt. Lucas suspected something unusual was going on, but the analytical chemistry techniques of his era weren't sophisticated enough to identify these mysterious compounds. Fast forward to 2025, when researchers at Yale University's Ancient Pharmacology program applied cutting-edge mass spectrometry techniques to alabaster vessels from the Achaemenid Persian period that were inscribed with multiple ancient languages. The vessels were made from the same Egyptian quarries and shared many characteristics with those found in King Tut's tomb. The analysis revealed definitive chemical signatures for opiate alkaloids, including morphine, thebaine, paparin, noscapine, and hydrocotinine. This wasn't just trace contamination or accidental presence. The concentrations detected indicated deliberate preparation and storage of opium-containing materials. The implications of this discovery are profound and force us to rethink almost everything we thought we knew about drug use in ancient Egypt. Opium wasn't just a rare exotic substance occasionally used for medical emergencies. The prevalence of these alabaster vessels across different time periods and social classes suggests that opiate use was woven into the fabric of ancient Egyptian society in ways historians had never fully appreciated. The vessels themselves provide important clues about how opiates were used. The alabaster material was chosen specifically for its properties as a storage medium. Unlike pottery or wood, alabaster is non-porous and doesn't react chemically with organic substances, making it ideal for long-term storage of volatile alkaloid compounds. The stone also helps maintain a stable temperature, protecting sensitive compounds from degradation. Ancient Egyptians understood material science at a level that impresses even modern chemists. The distinctive vessel designs weren't just decorative, they were functional. The narrow necks and wide bodies allowed for maximum surface area of the opiate material while minimizing exposure to air when the container was opened. Some vessels had elaborate sealing systems involving wax, resin, and linen wrappings that created essentially airtight storage conditions. These weren't casual containers thrown together for random storage. They represented sophisticated pharmaceutical packaging designed to preserve potent substances for years or even decades. The question of who had access to these opiate preparations is fascinating and complicated. The presence of alabaster opium vessels in King Tut's tomb indicates that pharaohs certainly used these substances, probably for both medical and spiritual purposes. But the discovery of similar vessels in more ordinary tombs, like the merchant family burial site at Sedmont, suggests that opiate use wasn't exclusive to the royal family and upper priesthood. This challenges the long-held assumption that powerful psychoactive substances in ancient civilizations were always restricted to elite classes. The pattern of theft from King Tut's tomb tells us something important about how these substances were valued. The ancient robbers who broke into the tomb shortly after it was sealed didn't just grab the obvious valuable items like gold jewelry. They specifically targeted the alabaster jars, carefully scraping out every last bit of the sticky brown contents. You can still see the finger marks they left inside the vessels, testament to their determination to extract every possible amount of the substance. What would motivate such risky and painstaking theft? The answer clearly points to materials that had significant value, probably both monetary and personal. The spiritual dimension of opiate use in royal Egyptian context cannot be ignored. The journey into the afterlife, as conceptualized in Egyptian religion, bore striking similarities to the experiences induced by opiate intoxication. The sense of floating, the feeling of separating from one's physical body, the vivid dreamlike visions, all of these are characteristic of strong opiate experiences and also match descriptions of the soul's journey through the duat found in funerary texts. It seems entirely plausible that pharaohs practiced dying through controlled opiate experiences rehearsing their eventual final journey into the realm of the gods. This practice of using mind-altering substances to simulate death and rebirth wasn't unique to Egypt. Similar traditions existed in many ancient cultures, from the Eleusinian mysteries in Greece to the Vedic Soma ceremonies in India. But the Egyptian version, combining opium with other psychoactive plants like blue lotus and mandrake, may have been the most sophisticated and well-documented of these practices. The alabaster vessels represent physical evidence of a lost technology of consciousness that once played a central role in how ancient people understood the nature of existence, death, and transcendence. The chemical analysis has also revealed that the Egyptians weren't using raw opium in its crude form. The compounds detected in the alabaster vessels suggest complex preparation methods involving selective extraction and concentration of specific alkaloids. They somehow figured out how to isolate the sleep-inducing components while minimizing the compounds that caused nausea and other unpleasant side effects. This represents pharmaceutical sophistication that wouldn't be matched again until the 19th century, when morphine was first isolated and purified by Friedrich Serturner. The preparation methods probably involved multiple steps of heating, dissolving in various solvents, filtering, and concentration. Ancient Egyptian medical papyri contain recipes for plant preparations that involve remarkably complex procedures, some requiring weeks of careful processing. The opiate preparations stored in alabaster vessels likely represented the culmination of these lengthy processes, producing substances far more refined and potent than anything that could be achieved through simple consumption of raw poppy sap. One of the most intriguing aspects of the research is how it connects to other ancient civilizations. The inscribed vessel analyzed at Yale was from the Achaemenid Persian Empire, which controlled Egypt for nearly 2 centuries. The multilingual inscription on the vessel, written in Egyptian, Persian, Akkadian, and Elamite, demonstrates how pharmaceutical knowledge and trade in opiate preparations crossed cultural and linguistic boundaries. The same alabaster vessel technology that originated in Egypt spread throughout the ancient Near East, carrying Egyptian pharmaceutical innovations to distant lands. This international trade in opiate preparations has left traces in unexpected places. Chemical analysis of ancient shipwrecks in the Mediterranean has revealed similar alkaloid signatures in cargo vessels that travelled between Egypt and Greece. Literary references from Greek and Roman sources describe Egyptian opium as particularly prized for its purity and potency. It seems that ancient Egypt wasn't just using these substances domestically, they were exporting their pharmaceutical expertise throughout the ancient world, much like pharmaceutical companies do today. The economic impact of this opiate trade would have been substantial. High-quality opium preparations commanded premium prices, and the specialized knowledge required to produce them gave Egyptian physicians and pharmacists a form of monopoly power. This might help explain why Egyptian medical practices were so highly respected and widely adopted throughout the ancient Mediterranean world. They weren't just offering medical theory, they were providing access to substances that produced undeniable and powerful effects. The religious and medical establishments in ancient Egypt were closely intertwined, and opiate preparations sat at the intersection of these domains. Temple complexes often included facilities for growing and processing medicinal plants, and priests underwent extensive training in pharmaceutical preparation as part of their religious education. The boundary between healing the sick and facilitating spiritual experiences was fuzzy at best, and substances like opium served both purposes simultaneously. The Yale discovery has opened up entirely new research directions for understanding ancient Egyptian society. Scholars are now re-examining other archaeological finds with fresh perspectives, looking for similar evidence of opiate and other psychoactive substance use that might have been overlooked or misidentified in previous analyses. The Grand Egyptian Museum in Giza, which houses the vast majority of artifacts from King Tut's tomb, is now considering allowing chemical analysis of the many alabaster vessels that have never been properly tested. If these tests confirm widespread opiate presence, it could revolutionize our understanding of daily life and spiritual practice in ancient Egypt. The ethical questions surrounding this research are complex and deserve careful consideration. These are sacred objects from a burial context, placed in tombs as part of religious rituals meant to ensure safe passage into the afterlife. Is it appropriate to analyze them using destructive testing methods? Does the potential historical knowledge justify the cultural violation? Different stakeholders have different perspectives on these questions, from museum curators focused on preservation to researchers eager to unlock ancient secrets to Egyptian authorities concerned about their cultural heritage. The discovery also raises questions about modern policy toward ancient plant medicines. If sophisticated civilizations like ancient Egypt integrated opiate use into their medical and spiritual practices for thousands of years, what does that tell us about contemporary drug policies? Should we be reconsidering our approach to these substances based on their long history of human use? These are politically charged questions without easy answers, but the archaeological evidence forces us to confront them honestly. The scientific analysis of King Tuts' alabaster jars represents just the beginning of a new chapter in our understanding of ancient Egyptian pharmaceutical practices. As analytical chemistry techniques continue to improve, we'll be able to detect even smaller traces of organic compounds and build increasingly detailed pictures of exactly what substances ancient people were using and how they prepared them. Each new discovery adds another piece to the puzzle of how these remarkably sophisticated ancient people understood and manipulated human consciousness. Chapter 12. Why Your Ancestors Slept Better. The Lost Egyptian Sleep Wisdom That Modern Science Forgot. Why did ancient Egyptians sleep better than we do despite living in a world without air conditioning, comfortable mattresses, or any of the sleep technology we take for granted today? The answer reveals uncomfortable truths about how modern life has actually made sleep worse in many ways, and why we might need to learn from ancient wisdom to solve our contemporary sleep crisis. Let's start with a shocking statistic that should concern everyone listening. In the United States alone, more than 70 million people suffer from chronic sleep disorders. We spend over $80 billion every year on sleep aids, medication, special pillows, white noise machines, sleep trackers, and countless other products promising better rest. Despite all this spending and all our modern technology, people report being more exhausted and sleep-deprived than ever before in human history. Something has gone seriously wrong with how we approach sleep. Now contrast that with what we know about sleep in ancient Egypt. Archaeological evidence suggests that most Egyptians got between 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night, falling asleep shortly after sunset and waking naturally at dawn. They reported having vivid, meaningful dreams that they interpreted as messages from the gods. They had remarkably low rates of what we would now classify as insomnia or sleep disorders. They didn't need sleep clinics, prescription medications, or cognitive behavioral therapy to achieve healthy sleep patterns. What were they doing that we've forgotten? The first and most obvious difference is light exposure. Ancient Egyptians lived in rhythm with natural light cycles in ways that are almost impossible for modern people to comprehend. When the sun went down, they didn't flip a switch and flood their environment with artificial brightness. They used oil lamps and candles that produced warm, flickering light that mimicked firelight, the type of illumination that human biology evolved to interpret as signals that sleep time was approaching. This gentle transition from daylight to darkness allowed their brains to naturally begin producing melatonin, the hormone that regulates sleep cycles. Compare that to the modern experience. We spend our evenings bathed in bright LED and fluorescent light that tricks our brains into thinking it's still daytime. Worse still, we stare at screens emitting blue wavelengths that particularly suppress melatonin production. Then we wonder why we can't fall asleep when we finally turn everything off and get into bed. Our bodies are confused, receiving mixed signals about whether it's time to sleep or not. We've created an artificial lighting environment that actively fights against healthy sleep, and then we try to fix the problem with pills instead of addressing the root cause. Ancient Egyptians also understood temperature management in ways we've forgotten. They didn't try to maintain constant artificial temperature throughout the night. Instead, they took advantage of natural temperature fluctuations that actually promote better sleep. The desert nights get quite cool compared to the daytime heat, and Egyptians often slept on rooftops where they could feel this temperature drop. Modern research has proven that falling core body temperature is crucial for initiating and maintaining deep sleep stages. But we fight against this natural process by keeping our bedrooms at constant warm temperatures. The sleep surface matters more than most people realize. Ancient Egyptians slept on firm reed mats or simple wooden beds with minimal padding. While this might sound uncomfortable to modern ears, it actually promotes better spinal alignment and prevents the body from sinking into soft surfaces that can cause back problems and disrupt sleep. The multi-$1,000 memory foam mattresses we buy today often create more problems than they solve, trapping heat and allowing bodies to sink into positions that aren't biomechanically optimal for extended rest. Ancient Egyptian sleep positions were also quite different from modern habits. They often slept on their sides with minimal head elevation, using small wooden headrests that supported the neck without tilting the head too far upward. This position keeps airways open and reduces snoring and sleep apnea, conditions that affect millions of modern people. The elaborate pillow stacking and specific sleeping positions we try today are often attempting to solve problems created by poor sleep surface design in the first place. The relationship between food and sleep was well understood in ancient Egypt. They didn't eat large meals close to bedtime, understanding that digestion disrupts sleep quality. Their evening meals were typically small and featured foods that promoted relaxation, like barley porridge, dates, and herbal infusions. They avoided stimulating foods and beverages in the evening hours. Modern habits of late-night snacking, heavy dinners, and caffeinated beverages consumed well into the evening represent a dramatic departure from practices that supported healthy sleep for thousands of years. Physical activity patterns in ancient Egypt naturally promoted better sleep. Most people engaged in regular physical labor throughout the day, whether in agriculture, construction, craft work, or other occupations. This consistent physical exertion, combined with plenty of time spent outdoors in natural sunlight, created strong circadian rhythms and healthy sleep pressure. Modern sedentary lifestyles, where people sit at computers all day, create neither the light exposure nor physical tiredness needed for healthy sleep. We try to compensate with exercise classes and gym memberships, but these artificial activities don't fully replicate the sleep benefits of naturally physically active lives. The ritual and routine surrounding sleep in ancient Egypt created psychological conditions that modern people often lack. The evening transition into sleep wasn't abrupt. It involved bathing, putting on special sleeping garments, burning incense, saying prayers, and other calming activities that signaled to both mind and body that sleep time was approaching. Modern people often try to transition instantly from stressful activities like checking work emails or watching intense television programming directly into sleep, then wonder why their minds race and prevent them from falling asleep quickly. The social and cultural attitude towards sleep in ancient Egypt was fundamentally different from modern perspectives. Sleep wasn't viewed as wasted time or something to minimize in favor of productivity. It was considered sacred time when the soul traveled and received divine messages. This cultural respect for sleep meant people prioritized getting adequate rest and didn't brag about sleeping only 4 or 5 hours as if it were a badge of honor. The modern glorification of sleep deprivation and busyness represents a cultural sickness that ancient Egyptians would have found incomprehensible. The plant-based sleep aids that Egyptians used were part of a holistic approach to sleep health, not a substitute for good sleep hygiene like modern sleeping pills often are. They used these botanical remedies occasionally when needed, not as daily medications required to achieve any sleep at all. The preparations they made were carefully dosed and combined with lifestyle practices that supported healthy sleep. Modern pharmaceutical sleep aids often create dependence and actually worsen sleep quality over time, while the natural compounds used by ancient Egyptians tended to work with the body's own sleep systems rather than overriding them. The importance of darkness in ancient Egyptian sleep practices cannot be overstated. Not just dimness, but true darkness that allowed the pineal gland to produce maximum melatonin. Modern people often sleep in environments with light pollution from streetlights, electronic device standby indicators, alarm clocks, and countless other sources of artificial illumination. Even small amounts of light can disrupt sleep quality by suppressing melatonin production and preventing the deepest stages of restorative sleep. Ancient Egyptians, sleeping under open desert skies, experienced darkness we can barely imagine in our light-polluted modern cities. The auditory environment of ancient Egyptian sleep was also quite different. While they certainly had environmental sounds like insects, animals, and wind, they didn't have the constant hum of electrical devices, traffic noise, sirens, and the countless other sounds that permeate modern life. Their brains could fully enter the quiet state needed for deep sleep without constantly being pulled toward wakefulness by unpredictable noises. We try to solve this problem with earplugs, white noise machines, and soundproofing. But these are poor substitutes for genuinely quiet sleeping environments. The dreaming practices of ancient Egyptians offer another fascinating window into lost sleep wisdom. They didn't just sleep. They actively cultivated dream experiences through specific preparation rituals and plant medicines. They viewed dreams as legitimate sources of knowledge and guidance, not random neural noise to be ignored. This cultural validation of dream experiences may have actually enhanced sleep quality by giving the dreaming mind permission to fully engage in its nightly processes without the skeptical filtering that modern rational minds often impose. Ancient Egyptian physicians understood that different sleep disturbances required different treatments. They didn't have one-size-fits-all approaches like modern pharmaceutical sleep aids. Difficulty falling asleep was treated differently from difficulty staying asleep. Nightmares were addressed separately from restless sleep. This nuanced understanding of sleep problems led to more targeted and effective treatments than our modern tendency to prescribe the same generic sedatives for every type of sleep complaint. The seasonal variation in ancient Egyptian sleep patterns is another aspect worth examining. They didn't try to maintain identical sleep schedules year-round. Summer sleep patterns differed from winter patterns, with adjustments made for temperature, daylight hours, and agricultural demands. Modern attempts to maintain perfectly consistent sleep schedules, regardless of natural environmental variations, may actually work against our biology's need for seasonal adaptation. Our bodies expect different sleep patterns in winter versus summer, but modern life forces uniformity that may contribute to sleep problems. Ancient Egyptians also recognized that sleep needs varied by age and life stage. Children slept longer than adults. Elderly people had different sleep patterns than young adults. Pregnant women needed extra rest. Modern one-size-fits-all sleep recommendations of 8 hours for everyone don't account for these natural individual variations that ancient physicians understood well. Forcing yourself to sleep 8 hours when your body only needs 7, or trying to function on 6 hours when you need 9, both create problems that ancient Egyptians avoided by respecting individual sleep needs. The community sleeping arrangements common in ancient Egypt provided psychological benefits we often overlook. Many people slept in family groups or communal spaces rather than isolated individual rooms. This social sleeping created feelings of safety and connection that promoted relaxation and easier sleep onset. Modern individualistic sleeping arrangements where people isolate themselves in private bedrooms, may actually increase anxiety and make falling asleep more difficult for some individuals, particularly children and those prone to nighttime anxiety. The preparation and planning that went into ancient Egyptian sleeping spaces shows how seriously they took sleep. The orientation of beds to catch optimal breezes, the choice of locations away from insects and pests, the use of mosquito netting and other protective measures. All of these details received careful attention. Modern people often treat sleep as something that just happens and give little thought to optimizing their sleeping environments beyond buying expensive mattresses. The ancient Egyptian approach of carefully engineering sleep conditions offers lessons we should relearn. The integration of spiritual practices with sleep in ancient Egypt created a sense of meaning and purpose around the nightly rest cycle. Sleep wasn't just biological maintenance, it was spiritual practice. The rituals performed before sleep, the prayers offered upon waking, and the interpretation of dreams all transformed sleep from mundane necessity into meaningful experience. Modern secular cultures have lost this sense of sleep as spiritual practice, and with it perhaps some of the psychological benefits that came from viewing sleep as sacred time rather than merely functional downtime. The ancient Egyptian recognition that sleep problems often reflected spiritual or emotional imbalances led to treatment approaches that addressed root causes rather than just symptoms. A person who couldn't sleep due to worry about unresolved conflicts would be advised to settle those conflicts, not just take a sleeping potion. Someone whose nightmares reflected fears about death would be guided through spiritual practices to make peace with mortality, not simply given drugs to suppress the dreams. This holistic approach to sleep disturbances stands in stark contrast to modern practices of treating all sleep problems with the same chemical interventions regardless of their underlying causes. The final lesson from ancient Egyptian sleep wisdom might be the most important. They understood that good sleep isn't something you achieve through products, medications, or technology. It comes from living in alignment with natural rhythms, maintaining healthy relationships with food and activity, cultivating spiritual practices that create peace of mind, and respecting sleep as valuable in its own right, rather than treating it as an obstacle to productivity. No ancient sleeping pill or modern pharmaceutical can compensate for a lifestyle that fundamentally opposes healthy sleep. Until we relearn this basic truth that ancient Egyptians knew intuitively, our modern sleep crisis will only worsen regardless of how many new products we develop. The story of Egyptian sleep aids, from desert bloom to dream, ultimately reveals that we haven't progressed as much as we like to think. In many ways, we've regressed. We've gained sophisticated chemical knowledge and impressive technology, but we've lost the wisdom to use these tools within frameworks that respect natural biological rhythms and spiritual dimensions of the sleep experience. The ancient Egyptians achieved better sleep with simpler tools because they understood something we've forgotten, that sleep is not a problem to be solved, but a natural process to be honored and supported. Perhaps the real journey we need to take isn't forward to new sleep technology, but backward to ancient wisdom that never should have been forgotten.